This podcast is a quest for well-being, a quest for a meaningful life through the exploration of fundamental truth. Enlightening ideas, insights on physical, mental, and spiritual health. The inspiration is love. The aspiration is to awaken new ways of thinking that can lead us to a new way of being well. Welcome to Body, Mind, and Soul Healing Conversations.
Young people and adults alike are bombarded with information about COVID-19, and they need to know how to tell science-based facts from fiction. To beat this pandemic, they need to understand the ways in which the virus spreads and prevent it from proliferating. Because SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, is host-dependent and must attach to and live inside the cells of other organisms to survive, it's possible to outsmart and inactivate the virus by first understanding the ways in which it spreads and then by engaging in measures to avoid, inactivate, and suppress its spread. Asymptomatic infections contribute to more than 50% of the spread of COVID-19, making transmission hard to control. More alarmingly, recent increases in COVID-19 associated hospitalization rates and the potential for severe disease in adolescents reinforce the importance of prevention strategies, writes the Center for Disease Control, CDC. Giving both young people and adults the knowledge for how to recognize how the virus spreads and how to suppress it through individual actions can help thwart infection on the insidious virus. Through understanding and individual responsibility, young people can shield themselves from the grip of the pandemic and move more confidently toward a safe return to everyday life. Valeria Tellis interviews Sabithri Prasad, the author of What is Coronavirus? How it Infects, How it Spreads, and How to Stay Safe. Sabithri Prasad is a writer who tackles issues we face in the global community. Prasad is the author of the Garbology Kids Waste Management Series for Children, which includes Where Do Recyclable Materials Go?, Operation Reuse It, and We Can Reduce, Recycle It. She is the founder of Firewater Media Group and Green Solutions magazine. Meet Sabithri at firewatermediagroup.com. Here's the interview with Sabithri Prasad.
In your own words, who is Sabithri Prasad?
Sabithri Prasad. So I would say Sabithri Prasad is a caring, very earthy person who really looks at the world from a perspective of equality and social justice. And I always like to have that balance or, connection with nature and the world around me.
How did you come to this understanding of yourself, Sabithri?
Well, I would say I came about this at a very young age. Ever since I was a child, my parents were also very spiritual. And as a child, I grew up connecting to nature, being outdoors a lot, but also looking up at the stars quite often. And not only looking up at the stars, but looking into myself. And that internal reflection really brings you to ask a lot of questions, not just about the world, around you in a physical sense, that way you interact with people, but also the world inside you, in your mind, in the things you believe in the things you care about, in the things you think about, as well as, looking up at the stars, the way you connect with nature and the way you connect with the things around you.
What is that about nature that brings us back to ourselves in a way?
That's a really great question. We are living things, and we are always surrounded by ourselves and other people. However, and in more modern times, we've been surrounded by things, inanimate objects, concrete buildings in urban settings. And the more and more we build up these urban settings around ourselves and entrap ourselves into these, structures, we detach ourselves from nature. And I think as we head back into nature and we reflect and we sit down, and let's just say you sit down by a lake or you sit down by a tree, and all of a sudden you start to focus on the smaller things that are around that tree. You might notice a speck of dirt. You might notice the tree roots. You might notice the little insects around the tree and how they, furrow their way into the soil and live their, go about their daily interactions. And as we kind of focus on the more smaller things and the things we don't normally focus on in our structures, we start to see that there are growing living things out there in nature as well that are making their way. And I think that connection helps us to try to bridge that spirituality between ourselves and nature.
What is your understanding of spirituality, Savitri, as of today?
Well, as I grew up, I was brought up, going to an Anglican church and reading the Bible and practicing that Catholic, spirituality and in religion and so on. But as I got older, I started to explore other things and understand other consciousness and other belief systems, and started to see that there is in overall throughout all of these religions, throughout all of these spiritual beliefs, there is an energy source, and that energy source is what engulfs your being, and how you really cultivate that energy source in yourself and bring that to the forefront. I believe it's something that we need to learn a lot more about as humans.
For me, it took many years to gather the courage to look deep within and to kind of cultivate this essence energy that you speak of. And it seems to be a practice too, which is kind of interesting. It might become a realization at some point, but then there's still practices that we need to engage in order to keep that flavor of that essence here in the now. It seems to me. Would you like to make a comment about that, or did I go too far with that spiritual ideas?
No, I think I think with regards to the consciousness and subconsciousness, there are many different reflections. For example, as I mentioned, there are a myriad of different belief systems, and I'll go from one end of the spectrum where in countries, each country has their own belief systems, some derived from some of the earliest forms of spirituality. And in their culture, in a certain culture, each country develops their own nuanced way of practicing that specific spiritual belief system, because they are enclosed by their borders, and they are really developing over centuries a certain practice among themselves. Now, if we take ourselves out of the country and focus on the globe, we then look at each country now and seeing different types of spiritual systems, and understanding between all of these spiritual systems that there are common elements in them. These common elements are things that we all end up living and guiding our lives from. So in a sense, if we were to step outside of the bubble and step out into the universe and look down on Earth itself, we can see this one, as I mentioned, energy source, and the energy that we have not really come to really understand yet, as a matter of fact. But then you have other kinds of energy source, which is the power of the energy of our brains, which we haven't yet fully understand the full capabilities of how we can develop that spirituality within our own selves.
In a way, you're bridging science to spirituality. And I have had conversations here on that specifically, like this connection and the underlying, let's say, commonality or common findings between science and spirituality. It has been a very interesting conversation to have, a topic to discuss.
Yeah, no, I have to say one more thing there, because for example, in religion, in Indian religion, there is this belief of reincarnation. That's one reiteration. But then there was in the more American world, there's an author. His name escapes me at the moment. However, he writes often about hypnosis as well as going into hypnosis with a patient or patients to understand their past life regression.
Brian Weiss, is that
correct? That is him, Brian Weiss, and he has. I've read a number of his books, and it's fascinating to me in his research and his experience. He's gone and he's done this past regression with several patients of his, where he's been able to, retrieve these memories or so-called memories that these individuals have had. And that kind of helped me, makes me wonder, does that have a connection to, the belief system of reincarnation from certain cultures? So, going back to my discussion of where I mentioned we only use a certain, percentage of our brain capacity, is this an area where we haven't tapped into yet? Is this something that we need to explore further? How do we understand this spiritual connection within ourselves and our own, desire to want to learn more about ourselves, not just in the physical world, but in previous, if there are instances like that, in previous, time periods. I mean, it sounds far-fetched to me right now, but I often try not to discount different types of perspectives, especially since the science has not been able to prove or disprove the discussion about that type of energy surrounding that type of spiritual topic.
That's what I love about science and scientists, that they're very open. It's an open field, so always kind of open to explore new findings from different perspectives. That is so beautiful about science. And when you talk about the brain, and I wonder if, that has been like an ongoing discussion for so long about the connection between the brain and the mind or consciousness, if consciousness is localized in the brain, or the brain is just a receptor and the mind, it's something that's abstract. We don't know. It's a mystery. No one knows where thoughts come from. What is your understanding of the brain and the mind, Savitri? Are they connected in that sense of being one, or they are separate entities?
That's a really deep question. And, I've read, there's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which is highly recommended. And he talks about how the brain has two different modes of thinking. One is, where the brain starts to, has to really take a step back and really think about what it has to do before it actually does it. And then there's the, side of the brain that actually just does. And then, in that respect, science has come a long way with the brain. But I believe, like I said, we only use a very small portion of our brain. So understanding how it functions in terms of the understanding of how we ourselves understand ourselves and what science can understand about us. And I see that science really, there are lots of science that focus on the physical aspects of the brain, but then there's the psychological, side of the brain where it can be really conflicting for us to really understand. Intaking information in many ways, in many forms, in many aspects can help us to manipulate that information in various ways. And sometimes we can trick ourselves into understanding that we understand when we don't, when we may not really understand the full picture, just like science may not understand the full picture when they're focusing on one specific aspect of the brain. So the way I can see this is that with spirituality, it plays out in such a way where you never really know if you're tricking yourselves into believing certain things about spirituality, or you are experiencing certain things about spirituality. Yeah. If you understand what I mean.
And with that in mind, I have a question for you, an open question about the purpose of the human experience. What do you think that is?
Well, the human experience is such a broad question. The human experience, I think, is infinite. For me, I believe it's infinite in the sense that each individual can raise their bar to their own experiences and how that individual would like their life to be experienced and shown in this world is really one aspect of that experience. It's a really tough question to answer. I find that to be, because I can start going off into different tangents and different directions, but having an experience can say, I can go from saying, for example, I can experience what my daily interactions or what my daily routine would be, what my daily business life would be. But then I can retreat into myself at night and, in the dark and look up and just think to myself, well, who am I? Who is this person that is human? Where does my sense of origination come from? Not necessarily ancestry, but where do I get all of the things that I believe in, all of the experiences in my life, but what are the experiences out there that I want to experience in life that would take me up to this higher level of my full self, in terms of being able to give back to the world, being able to give back to others around me, being able to give back to my community. I can go on and on and on, but I feel unless there's a focus to that question, it can be very, very broad for me, the answer.
It seems like it boils down to the individual, the personal experience. If that experience is joyful, it's peaceful most of the time, and it's helpful to humanity, then it's almost like in itself a fulfillment. And it doesn't really matter what belief systems that person holds or what understandings they have about themselves even. It almost becomes a fulfillment in itself if it is accomplished somehow, it seems to me.
Agreed. I think peace is one of the aspects of spirituality that it needs to be brought out from everyone in a more overt way. Right now, I think it's suppressed. Everyone, I believe, has this wonderful goodness inside of them, and has that peace, loving side of them that they would love to, I'm sure, would love to be able to share with the world. And I think, how do we get that peace and that loving brotherhood, that sharing, that caring, and that compassionate side of people to the surface, that they can become one with each other? And I think that's sort of I feel is the ultimate goal, is to become one together as one, one people, one ultimate race of humanity. Being able to help each other and take each other to the next level of how we can build upon the goodness in ourselves. And I feel that kind of really ties into really what you're saying in your podcast premise, is that taking all of that goodness and trying to achieve that spirituality as an individual, but also as a group on a whole for humanity.
So you wrote the book, What is Coronavirus? How it infects, how it spreads, and how to stay safe. My initial questions are, how did you become a writer? And what was the main inspiration, intention, and purpose of writing this book?
I became a writer at a very early age. When I was younger, I loved music. I still do, but I really enjoyed music a lot as a child. More so the lyrics of the music, so much so that I started to write my own lyrics without the music. And then I started to lean more towards poetry. And eventually, from poetry, later on, I started to delve into the more serious aspects of certain social issues. And about, let's say around 2007, I began producing an online magazine called Green Solutions Magazine, which focused on environmental issues. And it was until when I started writing those articles in that magazine that I started to realize that I wanted to do a little bit more just to help younger children. I first started off with writing books to my nieces and nephews. And that just turned into something that sparked a little bit more interest in my desire to want to do more writing that's more serious, but also with more clarity that the average everyday person can understand. So that brings me to this book. When we really heard about the virus being declared a pandemic in March of 2020, there was so much news on the airways, and I glued myself to that news because I wanted to learn more. I wanted to understand more. I wanted to grasp exactly what was happening. And what I found was I was getting really just bits and pieces because news stations really just focus on things that are really hot at the moment, but did not go in depth and filling out the bigger picture. So what I wanted to do was fill in those gaps for myself to understand all of the details that would help me to feel less fearful, less nervous, less uncertain about what was happening. And that brought me to gathering up all the information, all the research that kept coming out and piecing that together. It was actually kind of really like a puzzle to construct a full picture of what was going on. And that took me about 16 months. The first 6 months were the hardest. And after that first 6 months, it really started to write itself because I started to get a better picture, a better understanding. And I thought to myself, hey, I can't be the only one that can benefit from this. I need to be able to share this with other people. And I started to share it with my family and my friends, and they were really appreciative of it. So I thought, let's put it out there. Let's offer it to other people so that they too can understand.
And I love the way you did it. It's simple and it's fun. I love the illustrations. It makes it so much fun. The audience, it's only teens and children, I know 12. It's 12 up, right, Savitri?
The audience is 12 and up. However, I've gotten feedback and comments from so many people saying that even adults can go through this and have a better understanding. They can share it with they can read it and then share it with their children under 12, meaning that they can have a really good conversation when children ask parents, hey, what is this thing that people are so scared about? What is this, thing that people talk about in school? And as parents read through this, they can find really clear answers that they can communicate with their child to help them understand a little bit more about what's going on.
It has helped me. So I'm 45. As I said off record, I don't watch the news. And for some reason, I have kind of my focus, my attention is on what I do, and it's mostly nonfiction and spiritual conversations that has to do with joy and all that. So it's kind of different where I come from. So that was very refreshing, especially the fact that you have in your book that says most viruses do not cause diseases. I didn't know that, so I would love for you to explore that. And the other thing I didn't know was the asymptomatic infections. That I didn't know either. So talk to me for a moment about these two ideas that I didn't know, facts really.
Well, that's great that you picked up on that. And I'm glad you're highlighting that, because every time, we talk about viruses and diseases, it seems like the overarching emotion out there is that you have to be afraid of them. Many people are not aware that the entire world around us is made up of viruses.
Yeah, it's another big one, a big fact.
Exactly. So it's really, we have viruses in our gut, we have good bacteria, there are lots of viruses in the ocean that we go to swim in all the time. There are viruses in just our normal everyday objects, which we touch. So it's really helpful to understand. And I think, on a mental level, it's really helpful to understand that there are viruses everywhere and that there are good viruses out there that we depend on and that they depend on us. And so it's almost like placing the evil, villain tag on viruses and not necessarily seeing the good side of viruses. And I'm glad that we were able to highlight that just now. And with regards to the asymptomatic, I think, when we talk about airborne viruses, okay, there are a number of things that we learned about this virus where it has 3 different stages or 3 different appearances to, in people. The first is the symptomatic instance, where that is equal to, the virus plus any symptoms that you can physically see in a person. The pre-symptomatic stage, where someone is infected with the virus. However, they currently do not display physical symptoms. That comes a little bit later as the virus multiplies within that person. And then the last one is what you were referring to, which is the asymptomatic mention, where it's someone is infected with the virus, but they never show any symptoms at all. They are, for some reason, their body seems to suppress or it almost as if the body fights the symptoms or can handle the intensity of the virus replication within their system.
Yeah, that is interesting to know, because that's the reason why the coronavirus is very dangerous. It became dangerous, right, Savitri? Because we can be infected and we can pass that on, infect others.
That's
without
correct.
Knowing.
That's correct. Many people are unaware, or, many people who are asymptomatic may be unaware that they may even have the virus because they show no symptoms. And unless The only way that they are able to identify if they are positive is by testing and using either a PCR test, as described in the book, or one of the antigen tests. So the antigen tests are rapid tests, and the PCR tests are molecular tests. Both are done by nasal swabs, but I believe that as science advances, they have better ways. They may find better ways of, being less, intrusive to someone's inner, nasal cavity.
Right, uncomfortable. Yes. Another question I have about that is, what happens then when somebody is infected, but it's not really displaying the symptoms? Would you say that that person's immune system is strong? The body is able to handle the multiplication of viruses?
That indication would be that that person's immune system has been able to handle the virus in a way that the body does not react to it. However, I wouldn't go as far to say that that might be something that the person will never experience again. It's not yet understood,
Right.
I believe, by science that, the person may not be experiencing or may not experience other symptoms later on. For example, you might have read somewhere in the book where the issues with people who are known as long haulers, post-COVID syndrome.
Yeah.
So if someone has been infected, generally asymptomatic people might have antibodies and that they build up that they can defeat the virus from. However, once someone is infected, it is not yet known whether or not they could have symptoms 3 months from now or 6 months from now that may affect a different part of their body. So generally with people who are symptomatic, they have been seeing people who have had mild infections and some severe infection where they have later on developed this symptomatic issue called long COVID, technically referred to as post-COVID syndrome. And they're feeling lethargic or have had issues with their migraines or brain functionality. So it's kind of a real mystery to scientists so far. And they're gaining grounds in terms of understanding the long haulers and post-COVID syndrome a little bit better. But it's still something that is also, showing up very differently in different people. So that makes it even more challenging. And I would imagine that people who have immunocompromised systems might also be at higher risk than people who have a healthy system. But then again, I have heard instances and I have seen instances in reports where there are healthy individuals who have succumbed to the virus and have had, who have showed symptoms and not necessarily were asymptomatic. So these are all a lot of the mysteries that are still surrounding the virus that scientists are currently working on.
Why do you think the coronavirus, actually just for clarification, because I don't know, I just wanted the audience to know as well, is there a difference between these two terms, SARS, CoV, and then 2, and COVID-19, or they are one and the same?
There is a difference, and there is a big difference. SARS-CoV-2 is the name of the virus. COVID-19 is the name of the disease caused by the virus. So I think in the initial reporting and discussions that we've seen in the media and so on about this virus, that was something that confused many people. And I think this is why it was so important to do. Another reason why it was important to do this book was to clarify these terminologies, to help people to understand the virus is the actual particle that enters your body and infects you. You start to, once the virus starts to infect you and infect your organs, mainly it's a respiratory virus, so therefore it mostly infects the respiratory system. So as it infects your respiratory system, that infection, as the infection happens within your body starts to react to that, and you get a fever, you have high temperature, you start to show it physically. You start to, to have the loss of smell, the, and the other symptoms that are unique to this virus. And those symptoms together as a whole is what is referred to as the disease of the virus. And so the name that the World Health Organization has given the disease is to really distinguish it from the virus itself and to help, scientists discuss the virus without having to have that confusion among themselves, is to call it COVID-19, which stands for coronavirus disease 2019, which is the origin of the year of the origin of the virus.
And another question I have for you is, what is the main difference between the coronavirus disease and the influenza, the common cold that we usually have, most of us have, and have died from as well?
Sure. So the difference between the common cold and the coronavirus is that the common cold is basically caused by several other types of viruses. There have been one virus called the rhinovirus. There's also other viruses, previous coronaviruses as well, that are common, cold viruses. There's also adenovirus that causes the common cold. But these viruses are milder in nature. They are also have different symptoms. The symptoms could include sneezing, coughing, chest discomfort, muscle pain, body aches. But sometimes you might get some of the symptoms that might be related to, or that might be similar to a COVID-19, which are shortness of breath, loss of smell, sometimes fatigue and headache. But the complications really result in mostly pneumonia and sometimes severe acute respiratory syndrome, which is what's mostly associated with coronavirus. But in terms of the COVID-19 is more severe, and it has a much deadlier result in its infection with someone. And that is a huge difference from the common cold. Although the common cold can be associated with a different type of coronavirus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus really has a stronger effect on our respiratory system.
Is that one of the worst kind of viruses, would you say, in existence as far as science goes? Or are there other deadly viruses out there?
Well, I would emphatically say it's not the worst virus out there.
Right. Good to know.
It's one of those coronaviruses that infect individuals. However, there are more deadly viruses out there, but those viruses are well monitored by the World Health Organization and organizations like the CDC, Center for Disease Control. For example, there is a virus called Ebola that's out there, and it's been present in some African countries, as well as actually reared its head in the United States at some point in the past in Reston, Virginia. So That's one. Another one that's even more deadly than the Ebola virus is the Marburg virus. And that, also has been seen in certain places around Africa as well. However, the difference between a SARS-CoV-2 and, something like an Ebola and a Marburg is that SARS-CoV-2 would be more or less in a level 3 containment something like an Ebola and a Marburg virus would be more like a level 4 containment.
And when you say containment, what does it mean exactly?
Containment meaning that in virology world, in the virology world, where scientists study these viruses, they build labs that they can study these viruses in. And in these labs, they divide or separate the viruses into levels. Level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 4 containment. So when you go in to study a virus, if it's a level 1, that containment is not as strict as a containment in a level 4. In a level 4 containment, I believe I showed a small picture of it in the book, in a certain part of the book where we're talking about where did SARS come from, and the level 4 containment, the virologists would have on equipment that protects them all over. Almost like a spacesuit. It looks like almost like a spacesuit.
Right.
So it protects them from that infection or that contamination from the virus.
That makes me think about the hurricanes. I live in Florida, category 1, 2, 3. And yeah, that makes sense. Another question is about this relationship between the SARS-CoV-2 and animals, because I have read or heard from family members that started in animals, and then now we just got to transfer it to humans. How did that happen?
So basically, SARS-CoV-2, it is believed that the virus was first identified in bats. And generally, when bats are thought to have passed that virus that they contain, or that's within them, into an intermediate host. The intermediate host may have then transferred that virus to a human. That's one pathway. Another pathway could be that, for example, someone goes into a cave that has these bats that had coronavirus, and that person somehow inadvertently got infected from either feces that was left over in the cave, or saliva, or some other type of transmission within the cave, either breathing it in because it is an airborne pathogen. And directly from the bat, it transferred to a human host. Another way that people have thought that it might have transferred was through animals in a seafood market. So that would also be similar to the intermediary host, where it comes, generally from a bat and then goes into an intermediary animal and then transferred to humans. So, and then obviously then there's the idea of the lab leak theory. So, and we all know the controversy behind that. So until there's scientific evidence, right now, everything is literally just speculation right now.
Now we have the vaccine. So most of us are getting vaccinated, and we're still using the masks. Like my husband and I, we still do that everywhere we go. But what are the other measures we can take to keep ourselves safe, Savitri?
Sure. Masks are definitely, I would say, one of the first things that would be the most important, because it is an airborne pathogen. I think if we think about it logically and sensibly, if something is airborne, how do you protect yourself? You protect yourself by trying to prevent that airborne particle or pathogen from getting into your body. And how do you do that? Is through a well-designed mask that is specifically made to protect you from these pathogens. And I would definitely, as you're hearing more recently in the news, the KN95 masks are specifically designed for this purpose, to be able to filter out about 95% of the pathogens that you're breathing in. They also have this static electric charge that repels the particles. So this is one thing that's really important to start with. The second thing that I think that we all know about and we've all heard at the onset of this pandemic in multiple news outlets or from multiple news outlets would be being able to take care of yourself by washing your hands frequently. It's a simple concept, just like how you would go outside and let's say there's exhaust from cars and pollution from vehicles out there on the highway. You come home and you do not want those exhaust and particles to be and soot to be sitting on your skin. Similarly, you just want to wash it off and make sure that all of those chemicals that's flying in the air is really cleaned off of your body. Similar thinking would have you going in that same direction to, as soon as you get home, go to the sink, wash your hands carefully, wash your face carefully to make sure that your skin is, and these particles that you perhaps may or may not have been exposed to, but to be on the safe side, you would want to make sure that you wash your hands properly. Now, if you're not outside or outdoors where you would have that luxury to wash your hands, I'm sure everyone is now carrying some sort of hand sanitizer with them in their vehicle or in their purse or somewhere. So that is sort of the alternative in the event that you don't have that full access to water and soap that will help you wash your hands. Things, if you don't have sanitizer, you feel that you might be around people, maintain, and you're in an environment where there are a number of people around, maintain your distance. If you're indoors, open up some windows, get some fresh air into the room. If you're in a place where you can get outdoors, if you're going to a restaurant, sit outdoors in the open air, on plein air, instead of being inside of the restaurant if it's packed with people. I think it's important to know that vaccination is very important, but there are also the idea that, sometimes people are vaccinated and their antibody levels have waned. And so you want to be also very careful that you are still practicing your basic things like wearing your mask around people who are still vaccinated, because a vaccinated person can still get the virus. And if that person gets the virus and they're actually shedding some virus, they may shed less virus, but if they're still shedding the virus and your antibodies have waned, then you have the susceptibility of possibly contracting the virus as well. So you have to also be able to, what my point is, that you also have to be able to think carefully about how, the situation that you're in, when you were vaccinated, when is your next booster shot, how long it's been since your booster shot, and, how many other people are out there, and, when have they been vaccinated, how long has their, booster shot lasted. So just being sensible about the things that are around you and understanding that I know it can get complicated, but I think if we, practice the basic things, and make it a routine, make it a habit. They say that, a habit forms every 60 days. So if you practice within 60 days, it becomes a habit and it doesn't seem like such a burden any longer.
It's very much common sense, as you said. It's a sensible thing to do, but we tend to forget. So this is a beautiful reminder. Like I'm thinking here that sometimes I go to my family's house and everything's closed, the windows, and we're all breathing the same air. So that doesn't seem safe.
I would say that I tend to be a little extra cautious. And, when I talk about SARS and coronavirus disease, COVID-19, I tend to be a little bit more careful. And the reason for that is because I have a parent who is highly immunocompromised, and her immunocompromised system and situation has led her to get the vaccine, but she had a very severe allergic reaction to the vaccine. So right now, she does not have any protection measures that she can take. And so just my consciousness of her situation helps me to be a little bit more proactive in the things that I do to protect her. And, if we all really consider the people around us and think about those people who we care about the most and think about what we can do to protect them, then I think we should be really in that headspace to do the things that would benefit ourselves as well as the people around us.
Beautiful message to another one, Savitri. It goes back to the idea we were discussing earlier about this sense of spirituality that it is in each one of us, and we can bring this to expression so we can navigate this reality in such a way, doing what is good for us and others at the same time. Thank you for that reminder towards the end. It kind of brought everything together again. Thank you so much for your wisdom, your knowledge, and everything that you're doing to help yourself and others. It's truly beautiful. Thank you.
Well, I thank you very much for having me on to be able to discuss this. And I really think we all have it in us to really reach that point. And I think if we kind of remind ourselves that there is good inside all of us, I think we should be, on that path to achieving that spirituality.
Before we say goodbye, I want to thank you again for your presence and your healing presence in this reality. And also, where can we find more information about you, your work, products, books, services, and future projects?
Well, I really thank you for having me. It's been such a huge pleasure to be able to speak with you and understand a little bit more about myself as well as the discussion that we were having. We can find more on the book at my website, and that's www.firewatermediagroup.com. If you go to that website, you'll find everything about the book, as well as any way to contact me. You can find me on LinkedIn, as well as Twitter and Facebook. In addition, you can find the book wherever books are sold, such as Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, and any major outlets. I would say one thing, though. Right now, your listeners would have a treat. The book is actually now on sale for $2.99 until the end of February. So if anyone out there would be interested in grabbing up the electronic version of it, they can find it on Amazon as well as Apple and Kobo.
Ah, wonderful. I'll have that note and I'll have the link to your website on the podcast profile too. Thank you so much again, Savitri, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Valeria. It was my pleasure, and I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye for now.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about Savitri Prasad and her work, please visit firewatermediagroup.com.
To
learn more about this podcast, please visit fitforjoy.org/podcast. Thank you again for listening, and bye for now.